Think you know everything about this 1997 gangster epic? From Lucky Luciano's actual pinky ring making a cameo to the bizarre coincidence of one actor playing both sides of Bumpy Johnson across 2 decades, Hoodlum harbors secrets stranger than its fictional storylines. Prepare to discover production mishaps, casting oddities, and behind-the-scenes moments that prove reality was often weirder than the movie itself. Fact 1. Chicago masqueraded as Harlem. When director Bill Duke set out to recreate 1930s Harlem for his gangster epic Hoodlum, he faced an unexpected problem that would define the entire production. The real Harlem, despite being the actual setting for Bumpy Johnson's rise to power, simply didn't look the part anymore. Decades of urban development had erased much of the authentic period architecture that Duke needed to transport audiences back to the Depression era. The solution came from an unlikely source hundreds of miles away. Chicago's South Side and downtown areas had somehow preserved the exact type of late 19th and early 20th century buildings that Harlem had lost to modernization. The Windy City's architectural landscape offered filmmakers a perfect time capsule of the era they were trying to recreate, complete with the ornate facades, vintage storefronts, and classic brownstone buildings that would have lined Harlem's streets during Bumpy Johnson's heyday. This location switch wasn't just a minor adjustment, but a complete geographical makeover that touched every aspect of the film. The famous Cotton Club scenes were filmed at the Chicago venue, located at 2222 South Michigan Avenue. The dramatic shootout where Madam Queen nearly loses her life took place on South LaSalle Street, not in any New York neighborhood. Even Bumpy's apartment building was actually located on North Pine Grove Avenue in Chicago. The irony runs deeper when you consider that this was Bill Duke's second Harlem set film to avoid filming in actual Harlem. His earlier movie, A Rage in Harlem from 1991, was shot in Cincinnati for similar reasons. Duke had developed a pattern of finding better preserved historical settings outside of New York, suggesting that the real Harlem had been transformed so dramatically that it could no longer convincingly portray its own past on screen. Fact 2. Lucky's real ring stole the scene. In one of the most authentic touches in Hoodlum, Andy Garcia actually wore a piece of genuine mob history during his portrayal of Lucky Luciano. An old friend of the real Charles Lucky Luciano approached the production team and offered to loan them one of Lucky's actual possessions for the film. The item in question was Lucky's personal pinky ring, a piece of jewelry that had belonged to one of America's most notorious crime bosses. The ring makes its brief but historically significant appearance during a pivotal scene where Lucky Luciano hands over bribe money to prosecutor Thomas Dewey at a brothel. Eagle-eyed viewers can spot the authentic piece of gangster memorabilia when the prostitute takes a cigar out of Lucky's hand during this exchange. The moment represents a fascinating collision between Hollywood fiction and real criminal history, with Garcia literally wearing a piece of the past while portraying the infamous mobster. What makes this detail particularly remarkable is how the ring's owner chose to share this piece of history with the filmmakers. The friend of Lucky Luciano could have easily kept such a valuable and historically significant item private, but instead decided to contribute to the film's authenticity by allowing it to appear on screen. This decision gave the production an unexpected level of historical credibility that no costume department could have replicated. The scene itself carries additional weight knowing that Garcia is wearing something that actually belonged to the real Lucky Luciano. While most period films rely entirely on replica props and costumes to create their historical atmosphere, Hoodlum briefly featured an actual artifact from the 1930s criminal underworld. The ring serves as a tangible connection between the dramatized events on screen and the real-life story of organized crime in Depression-era New York, making that particular moment unexpectedly authentic in ways that audiences would never realize without knowing this behind-the-scenes detail. Fact 3. The 30 million TV movie look. Hoodlum carried one of the most puzzling contradictions in 1990s filmmaking, boasting a massive $30 million budget while somehow managing to look like it was made for television. Critics and audiences alike were baffled by how a film with such substantial financial backing could end up with visuals that felt more suited to a Sunday night TV movie than a major theatrical release. The budget itself was nothing to scoff at in 1997, representing serious Hollywood investment that should have translated into premium production values. With $30 million at their disposal, the filmmakers had access to top-tier talent, elaborate period costumes, vintage cars, and extensive location shoots across Chicago. The money was clearly spent on assembling an impressive cast that included Lawrence Fishburne, Tim Roth, Andy Garcia and Cicely Tyson, along with detailed recreations of Depression-era settings. However, the cinematography choices made by director Bill Duke and cinematographer Frank Tidy created a visual style that undermined all that expensive production design. Critics specifically noted that despite the film's ambitious scope and hefty price tag, the lighting and camera work gave Hoodlum a flat, uninspired look that resembled the kind of made-for-television movies that networks produced on much smaller budgets. The film's visual presentation lacked the cinematic polish and dynamic camera work that audiences expected from a major studio gangster epic. This disconnect between budget and visual quality became particularly noticeable when compared to other crime films of the era. Movies like Casino and Goodfellas had demonstrated how effective cinematography could elevate gangster stories into visually stunning experiences, making Hoodlum's television-like appearance even more striking by comparison. The film essentially proved that throwing money at a production doesn't automatically guarantee cinematic visual quality, and that technical choices during filming can make even the most expensive project look surprisingly cheap on screen. Fact 4. The actor who played both sides. Clarence Williams III accomplished something truly unique in Hollywood by playing two completely opposite sides of the same historical story across two different decades. In Hoodlum, Williams portrayed Bub Hewlett, a black enforcer who worked for Dutch Schultz and served as one of Bumpy Johnson's primary antagonists throughout the film. Hewlett was essentially a traitor to his own community, helping white mobsters muscle in on Harlem's numbers racket and directly opposing everything that Bumpy Johnson represented. 10 years later, in 2007's American Gangster, Williams found himself cast as the complete opposite character when he took on the role of Bumpy Johnson himself. This casting created one of the strangest full-circle moments in gangster film history, with the same actor who had played Bumpy's enemy now embodying the legendary Harlem crime boss in what would become his final major film appearance. The transformation was particularly striking because Williams brought entirely different energy to each role. As Bub Hewlett in Hoodlum, he played a conflicted character caught between loyalty to his community and survival in a dangerous criminal world. His Hewlett was morally compromised, working against his own people's interests while struggling with the consequences of his choices. In American Gangster, Williams portrayed Bumpy Johnson as a wise, principled elder statesman of Harlem crime, someone who commanded respect and operated according to a strict personal code. What makes this casting even more remarkable is that Williams was best known for playing Lincoln Hayes in the television series The Mod Squad during the late 1960s and early 70s. His transition from iconic television detective to playing both sides of the same gangster legend demonstrates the range and longevity of his acting career while creating an unexpected connection between two major films about organized crime in Harlem. Fact 5. Real brothers playing hitman brothers. The casting of the Salke brothers in Hoodlum represents one of those perfect Hollywood moments where reality and fiction aligned in an almost too-good-to-be-true way. Mike Starr and Bo Starr, who portray the deadly hitman duo Albert and Jules Salke, are actually brothers in real life, bringing authentic sibling chemistry to their roles as professional killers hired by Dutch Schultz to eliminate Bumpy Johnson. Mike Starr, the younger of the two brothers, was already well established in Hollywood as a character actor who specialized in playing tough guys and criminals. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall with an intimidating presence, he had appeared in major films like Goodfellas and Dumb and Dumber, typically cast as thugs or henchmen due to his imposing physical appearance. His older brother Bo Starr had carved out his own successful acting career, becoming particularly well known for his role as Sheriff Ben Meeker in the Halloween film series during the late 1980s. The Salke brothers serve a crucial function in Hoodlum's plot as the professional assassins that Dutch Schultz brings in when his regular enforcers prove insufficient against Bumpy Johnson's operation. Their scenes together showcase a natural dynamic that would have been difficult to replicate with unrelated actors, as the real-life brothers understood each other's rhythms and could play off each other's energy in ways that felt genuinely familial. Critics particularly praised their big scene together, noting that the real-life siblings brought dark humor and engaging screen presence to their roles as cold-blooded killers. The brothers' natural rapport helped elevate what could have been standard villain roles into memorable performances that demonstrated the value of authentic relationships in casting decisions. Their work in the film showed how casting directors could find unexpected authenticity by looking beyond traditional acting partnerships to real family connections. Fact 6. The mispronounced mobster name. Throughout the entire runtime of Hoodlum, every single character consistently mispronounces the name of one of America's most famous crime bosses, creating a historical inaccuracy that runs through the film from beginning to end. Charles Lucky Luciano, the real-life mobster portrayed by Andy Garcia, actually pronounced his last name as Luciano, with the emphasis on the Lucy part, which is how everyone who knew him in real life said it. However, the filmmakers made the decision to use the more traditional Italian pronunciation Luciano throughout the movie, which sounds more authentic to Italian speakers but was completely wrong for this particular historical figure. This pronunciation choice reflects a common Hollywood assumption that using more ethnic-sounding pronunciations automatically creates greater authenticity, even when it contradicts historical reality. The real Lucky Luciano had Americanized his name pronunciation during his rise to power in the United States, adapting to American speech patterns in the same way that many immigrants of his generation modified their names to fit into their new country. By the time he became a major figure in organized crime during the 1920s and 30s, everyone in his circle, from fellow mobsters to law enforcement officials, knew him as Luciano. Luciano. This pronunciation error becomes particularly noticeable because of how frequently other characters say Luciano's name throughout the film. Every conversation involving the character reinforces the incorrect pronunciation, creating a persistent reminder that the filmmakers prioritized what they thought sounded more Italian over what was historically accurate. The mistake demonstrates how period films can sometimes get caught up in creating atmosphere at the expense of factual details, even when those details involve something as basic as how a real person pronounced their own name during their lifetime. Fact 7. December baseball game impossible. One of the most glaring anachronisms in Hoodlum occurs during a scene where Dutch Schultz is conducting business while a New York Yankees game plays on the radio in the background. The problem is that this scene takes place in December of 1934, making the presence of a live baseball broadcast completely impossible, according to the sport's seasonal schedule. Baseball season in the 1930s followed the same basic timeline that it does today, with regular season games ending in late September or early October, followed by the World Series, which typically concluded by mid-October at the latest. By December, professional baseball had been finished for at least 2 months, and players were deep into their off-season activities. Radio stations during this period would have been broadcasting winter programming like news, music shows, and serialized dramas, not baseball games. The scene becomes even more problematic when you consider that the film specifically establishes the December timeline through an on-screen title card that reads, December 1934. This means the filmmakers deliberately set the scene during winter while somehow overlooking the fact that they were including summer sports programming in the background audio. The mistake suggests that the production team either didn't research baseball scheduling or simply grabbed convenient sports audio without considering whether it matched the established timeline. This type of error highlights the challenges that period films face when trying to recreate authentic historical atmospheres. Radio programming was a crucial part of daily life during the 1930s, and getting these details right would have been essential for maintaining the film's credibility. The presence of impossible baseball commentary in a December scene creates a jarring anachronism that breaks the historical illusion for viewers who understand how seasonal sports worked during the Depression era, turning what should have been an atmospheric detail into a glaring continuity mistake. Fact 8. The tobacco-eating assassin performance. Paul Benjamin delivered such a distinctively menacing performance as the assassin whispers that film critics struggled to find adequate words to describe his unique screen presence, ultimately settling on the memorable description that he talked as if he eats tobacco leaves for breakfast. This colorful critical assessment perfectly captured the gravelly, unsettling quality that Benjamin brought to his supporting role in the film. Benjamin's character, Whispers, serves as one of Bumpy Johnson's most trusted and dangerous associates, a professional killer who handles the dirty work that comes with running a criminal empire in 1930s Harlem. Despite having relatively limited screen time compared to the film's major stars, Benjamin managed to create such a memorable character that he consistently stole focus whenever he appeared on screen, commanding attention through his distinctive vocal delivery and intimidating physical presence. The actor's approach to the role involved developing a specific speech pattern that made Whispers sound like he had been chain-smoking and chewing tobacco for decades, creating a voice that was both threatening and oddly hypnotic. Benjamin's performance technique gave the character an authentically weathered quality that suggested years of criminal activity and violence, making Whispers feel like someone who had genuinely lived through the brutal world of Depression-era organized crime. Critics consistently singled out Benjamin's work as one of the film's standout supporting performances, noting how he elevated what could have been a standard henchman role into something genuinely memorable and unsettling. His ability to steal scenes from established stars like Lawrence Fishburne and Tim Roth demonstrated the power of character acting, proving that even smaller roles could leave lasting impressions when performed with the right combination of intensity and authenticity. Benjamin's Whispers became the kind of supporting character that audiences remembered long after leaving the theater. Fact 9. Dutch Schultz was actually German. Throughout Hoodlum, characters consistently refer to Tim Roth's villainous mobster as the Dutchman, a nickname that appears historically accurate on the surface, but actually represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the real Dutch Schultz's ethnic background. The historical Arthur Flegenheimer, who adopted the name Dutch Schultz during his criminal career, was actually of German descent rather than Dutch, making the film's repeated use of this ethnically based nickname technically incorrect. The real Dutch Schultz earned his nickname not because of any connection to the Netherlands, but through a combination of his adopted moniker and the common American confusion between German and Dutch heritage that was prevalent during the early 20th century. Many Americans during this period used the terms Dutch and German somewhat interchangeably, partly due to the linguistic connection between Deutsch, which means German in the German language, and the English word Dutch. Arthur Flegenheimer chose the name Dutch Schultz as his criminal alias, likely borrowing it from a notorious local gang leader from an earlier era. The nickname the Dutchman then developed naturally from his adopted surname, but it had nothing to do with his actual ethnic heritage, which traced back to Germany rather than Holland. This type of ethnic confusion was common in American immigrant communities, where names and nicknames often reflected popular assumptions rather than accurate genealogy. The film's consistent use of the Dutchman throughout the dialogue reinforces this historical inaccuracy, with every character from Bumpy Johnson to Lucky Luciano referring to Schultz by this ethnically incorrect nickname. While the mistake doesn't affect the film's dramatic impact, it does demonstrate how easily Hollywood productions can perpetuate historical misconceptions, even when dealing with well-documented figures whose real backgrounds are readily available in historical records and criminal justice archives. Fact 10. Tim Roth's notoriously bad accent. Tim Roth's attempt at an American accent for his portrayal of Dutch Schultz in Hoodlum became one of the most discussed aspects of his performance, though not necessarily for positive reasons. Critics who reviewed the film specifically noted his pure guttural Bronx accent as actually representing one of his better efforts at American pronunciation, which says quite a bit about his previous struggles with mastering non-British speech patterns throughout his Hollywood career. The English actor had already developed a reputation in the film industry for his inconsistent American accents, and his work in Hoodlum continued this pattern of mixed results. While critics acknowledged that his Bronx-inflected delivery worked reasonably well for the rough street-level character of Dutch Schultz, they also noted that Roth's natural English pronunciation frequently broke through his attempted American accent during key scenes throughout the movie. This accent inconsistency created a somewhat jarring viewing experience for audiences who could hear Roth slipping between his authentic British voice and his attempted New York gangster dialect, sometimes within the same conversation. The problem became particularly noticeable during emotionally intense moments when Roth's concentration on his character's psychology seemed to override his focus on maintaining consistent pronunciation. Despite these vocal inconsistencies, critics generally praised Roth's overall performance as Dutch Schultz, noting that his natural intensity and commitment to the character's brutal personality helped overcome the accent issues. His portrayal captured the violent unpredictability that made the real Dutch Schultz such a feared figure in 1930s organized crime, even if his voice didn't always sound authentically American. The performance demonstrated how a strong actor could partially compensate for technical vocal limitations through sheer dramatic commitment and understanding of character motivation. Fact 11. The opera record label error. During one of Hoodlum's most sophisticated scenes, Bumpy Johnson and Madame Queen listened to opera music on a Victrola while discussing their criminal empire, but the props department made a significant historical mistake that music industry experts would immediately notice. The record playing on the vintage phonograph clearly displays an OK Records label, which creates a major anachronism since OK Records never produced opera recordings during its entire existence. OK Records, which was founded in 1918, specialized in a completely different type of music catalog that focused primarily on popular songs, jazz standards, light classical pieces, and blues recordings. The company built its reputation by recording African-American artists and popular music that appealed to mainstream American audiences during the 1920s and 30s, but opera was never part of their business model or artistic mission. The scene itself was clearly designed to show the cultured, sophisticated side of these Harlem crime figures, demonstrating that they appreciated high art and classical music despite their illegal professions. Having Bumpy and Madam Queen enjoy opera together was meant to add depth to their characters and show that they weren't simply street criminals but educated individuals with refined tastes who happened to work outside the law. However, the props department's choice to use an OK Records label completely undermines this cultural authenticity. Opera recordings during the 1930s would have been produced by major classical music labels like Victor Red Seal, Columbia Masterworks, or other companies that specialized in serious classical repertoire. These labels had exclusive contracts with famous opera singers and invested heavily in high-quality recordings of complete operas and individual arias. The mistake suggests that the filmmakers didn't research period-appropriate record labels carefully enough to match the music genre with the correct historical recording company. Fact 12. The impossible 1939 car, one of the most glaring anachronisms in Hoodlum, appears during an overhead street scene that takes place shortly before a series of newspaper headlines establish the date as 1935. Among the period-appropriate vehicles parked along the curb, eagle-eyed viewers can spot a 1939 black Buick sitting prominently in the shot, creating a time travel paradox that places the car 4 full years before it would have rolled off the assembly line. This type of automotive anachronism represents one of the most common mistakes in period filmmaking, since securing authentic vintage vehicles for every background shot can be extremely expensive and logistically challenging. Production crews often rely on whatever older cars they can find or afford to rent, sometimes without carefully checking the exact model years against the film's established timeline. The 1939 Buick in question would have featured distinct styling elements that automotive enthusiasts and classic car collectors would immediately recognize as being from the late 1930s rather than the mid-30s. Car designs during this era changed significantly from year to year, with manufacturers constantly updating their styling, chrome details, and body shapes to attract customers during the competitive Depression-era automobile market. The mistake becomes particularly noticeable because the film specifically establishes its 1935 timeframe through prominent newspaper headlines that appear shortly after this street scene, creating a direct contradiction between the stated date and the visible evidence in the background. This type of continuity error demonstrates the challenges that period films face when trying to maintain historical accuracy across every element of their production design, from major set pieces down to the smallest background details that most viewers might never consciously notice, but which can break the historical illusion for those who do spot them. Fact 13. The prison that wasn't Sing Sing. The opening moments of Hoodlum establish that Bumpy Johnson is being released from the famous Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York, but the actual prison building shown in the film's establishing shot is not Sing Sing at all, creating an immediate geographical deception that sets the tone for the production's loose relationship with authentic locations throughout the movie. Sing Sing Correctional Facility, located in Ossining, New York, has a very distinctive architectural appearance that would be recognizable to anyone familiar with the famous prison's actual structure. The real Sing Sing features specific building designs, wall configurations, and surrounding landscape elements that have made it one of America's most visually iconic correctional institutions since its construction in the 1820s. The prison facility that actually appears in Hoodlum's opening shot lacks these characteristic features of the genuine Sing Sing, suggesting that the filmmakers either couldn't gain access to the real location or found it more convenient to substitute a different correctional facility that was more accessible for their Chicago-based production. This location substitution fits the pattern established throughout the film of using geographically incorrect settings to stand in for the authentic New York locations where the historical events actually took place. The mistake becomes particularly significant because Sing Sing holds such an important place in American criminal history and popular culture. The prison housed many of the era's most notorious criminals and its reputation was well established by the 1930s when Bumpy Johnson would have been incarcerated there. Using a different prison facility for this crucial establishing shot undermines the historical authenticity that the film attempts to create, especially since many viewers would expect to see the real Sing Sing when the story specifically references this famous institution by name. Fact 14. The rain continuity disaster. The climactic final sequence of Hoodlum contains one of the most blatantly obvious continuity errors in the entire film, involving a miraculous transformation that defies the basic laws of physics and weather. In this emotionally crucial scene, Bumpy Johnson stands outside in a heavy downpour, with rain visibly soaking through his clothing and leaving him thoroughly drenched from head to toe, as water drips from his hair and runs down his face. The scene carries significant dramatic weight, as Bumpy contemplates the consequences of his choices and the violence that has consumed his life, with the rain serving as a symbolic element that emphasizes his isolation and the bleakness of his situation. The visual of the soaked gangster standing alone in the storm creates a powerful image that should represent one of the film's most memorable moments. However, the emotional impact gets completely undermined by what happens next. Bumpy crosses the street and enters a church for his cousin Illinois Gordon's funeral, but when the camera shows him inside the building, he appears completely dry without any trace of the torrential soaking he just received moments earlier. His hair is perfectly styled, his clothing shows no signs of wetness, and there are no water stains or dampness visible anywhere on his person. This type of continuity error represents a fundamental breakdown in filmmaking attention to detail, since maintaining consistency between consecutive shots is one of the most basic requirements of professional movie production. The mistake becomes particularly glaring because the two shots occur so close together in the sequence, with no time gap that could explain how Bumpy managed to completely dry off. The error transforms what should have been a poignant dramatic moment into an unintentionally comedic example of poor film editing that breaks the audience's suspension of disbelief at the worst possible moment. Fact 15. Thomas Dewey's character assassination. Hoodlum commits one of its most serious historical distortions by portraying Thomas E. Dewey as a corrupt prosecutor who accepts bribes from organized crime figures, when the real Dewey was actually one of the most incorruptible law enforcement officials in American history. The film shows Dewey taking payoffs from both Lucky Luciano and Bumpy Johnson, creating a completely false narrative that defames the reputation of a genuine reformer who dedicated his career to fighting the exact type of corruption the movie falsely attributes to him. The historical Thomas Dewey built his entire career on his unwavering integrity and his relentless pursuit of organized crime figures during the 1930s and 40s. Far from being the corrupt official depicted in the film, Dewey was the prosecutor who actually succeeded in putting Lucky Luciano behind bars, using innovative legal strategies to convict the mob boss on prostitution charges when other approaches had failed to stick. Dewey's prosecution of Luciano in 1936 became one of the most famous criminal cases of the decade, establishing his reputation as a fearless crime fighter who couldn't be bought or intimidated by organized crime. His success in this case launched a political career that would eventually see him become governor of New York and the Republican presidential nominee in 1944 and 1948. The film's portrayal becomes particularly problematic because it directly contradicts well-documented historical facts about Dewey's character and career. By showing him accepting bribes from the very criminals he prosecuted in real life, Hoodlum essentially creates a slanderous alternate history that portrays one of America's most ethical prosecutors as exactly the opposite of what he actually was. This type of character assassination in a Hollywood film demonstrates how period movies can sometimes prioritize dramatic convenience over historical accuracy, even when dealing with real people whose actual records are thoroughly documented.